She walked into my son's first birthday, calm, graceful, holding a small white envelope. When I opened it, the room froze. My hands shook. The words on that paper erased everything I thought I knew. That day, I learned, the child I was so proud of might not even be mine. My name is Henry Jackson, 38, financial analyst. I've built a life on numbers, predictable, logical, measurable. I thought I understood value. But it turns out I only understood price. 8 years of marriage, a quiet home outside Seattle, a wife who smiled softly, spoke gently, and loved quietly. Her name was Yan. And somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing her, really seeing her. We were trying to have a baby, month after month, test after test, and nothing. Each result came back the same, empty. The silence that followed those results became heavier than any argument. At first, we still talked about it, still hoped, but hope turns bitter when it stays too long. I started avoiding home, burying myself in work, in deadlines, in meaningless reports. It was easier to face spreadsheets than her disappointed eyes. I told myself it was just stress, just a phase, that love, like everything else, could be managed, fixed, balanced. But deep down, I was afraid that something inside me had already broken. Yan never accused, never shouted. She just smiled less, spoke less, and waited for me to notice. I didn't. I thought her silence meant peace, when it was really surrender. If you asked me then, I would have said we were fine, stable, functional, married. But looking back, I see it now. That was the moment our story started to end, not with betrayal, not with anger, just silence, the kind that only truth can fill once it's too late. It started small, like most cracks do, a question here, a sigh there. One night, after another failed test, I asked, "Did you even follow the doctor's instructions?" Yan looked up from her cup of tea, eyes tired but calm. "I did, Henry." I laughed, not kindly. "You say that every time." She said nothing, just that quiet stare, the kind that doesn't defend, doesn't fight back. I hated that silence. It made me feel like the cruel one. So I filled it with words I shouldn't have said. "Maybe if you cared more about your health, if you stopped being so careless, maybe we'd have a child by now." Her lips parted, as if to speak, but she stopped herself. And I remember thinking, good, at least she's listening. But she wasn't listening. She was breaking. Weeks passed. I buried myself in work. She went to appointments alone. I told myself it was fine, that she preferred it that way. When she came home late one evening, the sound of rain on her coat, she said softly, "I went to the clinic today." I barely looked up from my laptop. "And?" Her voice was small, almost apologetic. "It's my fault, Henry. The doctor said, it's me." I froze for a moment. Then I nodded. That was all. No hug, no comfort, no questions. Just a quiet nod, because the only thing I felt was relief. She turned away, her shoulders trembling. I thought she was cold. Now I know she was crying. That night, I slept soundly for the first time in months. Somewhere in my selfish mind, I felt vindicated. I wasn't the broken one. I was normal. And that thought was tongue, that cruel, shallow comfort, was the first real betrayal in our marriage. Tashi Miller. She was new at the office, bright eyes, quick smile, the kind of energy that filled every room. She laughed at my jokes, listened when I spoke, and looked at me the way no one had in a long time. It felt harmless at first. Coffee breaks, late meetings, shared sighs about deadlines. At home, Ziyan's silence had become unbearable. At work, Tashi's laughter was a kind of medicine, soft, dangerous, and sweet. One evening, after a long week, we stayed late to finish a report. She poured me a drink. I told her about the fights, the emptiness, the things I'd never said aloud. She placed her hand over mine and said, "You deserve to be happy, Henry." I should have pulled away. I didn't. That night, under the dim light of the office, the line blurred. Her lips met mine, hesitant, then certain. It felt like breathing again after years underwater, like life was still possible, even if it wasn't mine to take. Days turned into weeks. We met in quiet places, hotel rooms, her apartment, anywhere the world couldn't see. She made me feel alive, wanted, whole, but it was an illusion, a reflection of everything I'd lost at home. Ziyan began to notice the missed dinners, the perfume that wasn't hers, the sudden guilt in my voice, but she never confronted me. And somehow, that silence, again, felt like permission. A month later, Tashi showed up at my door after work. Her hands were shaking, her voice barely a whisper. "Henry, I'm pregnant." I stared at her, speechless. Then I laughed, and it turned into tears. It felt like a miracle, the one thing I'd wanted for years, handed to me when I least deserved it. In that moment, I thought fate was giving me another chance. I didn't see it for what it truly was, the beginning of my punishment. That night, I sat in the dark, watching the rain against the window, and for the first time, I whispered to myself, I have to tell Ziyan everything. I told her on a Thursday night. The rain hadn't stopped all day, and the house smelled like wet wood and quiet fear. She was folding laundry when I said her name. "Ziyan, there's something I need to tell you." She didn't look up. "You sound serious." My hands were shaking. I tried to speak, but my voice came out dry. "I've been seeing someone." The room went still. The fabric slipped from her hands and fell onto the floor. Her lips parted slightly. "How long?" 6 months, I said. And before I could take it back, before I could even breathe, I added, "She's pregnant." That silence, I'll never forget it. It wasn't the silence of shock. It was the silence of something breaking that had already been cracked for a long time. Ziyan sat down slowly, as if her body couldn't hold her anymore. I wanted her to scream, to curse, to throw something, anything that would make it easier for me to hate myself. But she didn't. She just stared at the floor, tears falling soundlessly. I took a step closer, whispering, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean—" "Don't," she said. Her voice trembled. "Please. Not now." She turned away, holding herself like someone trying not to disappear. And I stood there, a coward dressed as a man, watching the only person who ever truly loved me collapse in silence. Hours passed. I sat in the living room, listening to the clock tick against the storm. When she finally came back, it was past midnight. Her eyes were dry, her face calm. "Henry," she said, her tone almost gentle. "It's fine." I shook my head, unable to meet her eyes. "No, it's not. I ruined everything." She smiled faintly, not in kindness, but in acceptance. "It doesn't matter anymore. Just marry her. I hope you both have a good life." Those words hit harder than any slap could. She didn't yell. She didn't beg. She simply let go. And in that strange, unbearable calm, something in me twisted. I should have felt guilt, regret, relief. But what I felt instead was doubt. Her quietness was too steady, too composed. It wasn't the sound of a woman destroyed. It was the sound of someone who already knew that night. I realized something that haunted me long after she left. Sometimes the worst punishment isn't anger. It's forgiveness that feels too easy. The wedding happened too quickly for anyone to question it. No grand ceremony, no crowded ballroom, just a quiet courthouse, 2 signatures, and a half-hearted kiss that felt more like a truce than a vow. Still, I told myself it was love. Or at least the closest thing I deserved after everything that happened. Tashi looked beautiful that day. She always did. And when she smiled for the cameras, I could almost believe we were beginning again, that the wreckage of my past had finally been washed clean. When our son was born, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: pride. I named him Evan, meaning the gracious gift. I held him in my arms and thought, this is it. This is what it means to start over. Every sleepless night, every mistake, every memory of Ziyan, they all seemed to fade when I looked at his face. I convinced myself I had finally escaped the shadow of my failures, but the illusion didn't last. Tashi changed after Evan came. The warmth she once carried turned into something distant, guarded. She started spending more time at work, and her phone became an extension of her hand, always buzzing, always locked. When I asked, she said she needed time to adjust, that motherhood was heavier than she expected. I believed her, because believing was easier than admitting I saw the cracks forming again. Nights grew longer, the silence between us louder. I began to dream of Yan, her quiet smile, her soft voice. Sometimes I'd wake up thinking she was standing by the crib, humming the same lullaby she used to sing when I couldn't sleep. It was a cruel kind of comfort, the past wrapping around me just tight enough to remind me it never really left. There were moments, holding Evan, when I felt an emptiness I couldn't name, a subtle unease, like a note slightly out of tune. Tashi's touch no longer reached me, and my reflection began to look more like a stranger than a husband or a father. I told myself this was just fatigue, that new fathers falter, that love takes time. But deep down I knew better. You can change the address, the wife, even the child's name. But you can't escape the truth, not when it's the only thing that still recognizes you. Evan's first birthday was meant to be perfect. White balloons, a golden one candle, laughter echoing through the apartment. Tashi had invited colleagues, her friends, people I barely knew. I played the role of a proud father, smiling for photos, lifting Evan high into the air while pretending everything still held meaning. For a while it almost felt real. Then, in the middle of the noise, the doorbell rang. When I opened it, the world seemed to slow. Yan stood there, holding a small box wrapped in blue paper. Time hadn't touched her. Or maybe it had, but it made her stronger, quieter. She looked at me with that same calm I could never understand. No anger, no accusation, just stillness. "I heard it's your son's birthday," she said softly. "I just wanted to say congratulations." She handed me the gift in a plain white envelope. No name, no note. Before I could speak, she smiled faintly, that familiar, heartbreakingly gentle smile, and turned to leave. For a moment, I wanted to call her back, ask her why she came, what she wanted from me after all this time. But the words froze somewhere between my throat and my pride. Later that night, after everyone left and the last balloon sagged against the floor, I sat alone at the dining table. Evan was asleep. Tashi was scrolling through her phone, back turned. I picked up the envelope. Inside was a folded sheet of paper, a medical report from Dr. Howard's clinic dated years ago. My name printed clearly at the top. The words below blurred as I read them over and over. Azoospermia, no viable sperm cells detected. I felt my breath catch. The room spun. The laughter from earlier replayed in my head like a cruel echo. I stared at Evan's photo on the cake, those dark eyes, that innocent smile, and something inside me cracked open. If I was infertile, then whose son was he? The truth hit harder than any betrayal I had ever imagined, not from Tashi, not from Yan, but from life itself, mocking the man who thought he could build happiness on a lie. I sank to the floor, the paper trembling in my hands as the candle's last ember went out. For days I couldn't breathe. The paper from the envelope haunted me wherever I went, folded in my wallet, burning through the leather like a secret that refused to stay buried. Sleep was impossible. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Yan's calm face, the quiet mercy in her smile. I called Dr. Howard's clinic. At first they refused to speak. Confidential information, they said. But when I pressed harder, when I mentioned Yan's name, the nurse on the other end hesitated. Then, quietly she said, "Your wife, your former wife, asked us never to tell you. She didn't want you to lose your confidence as a man." I hung up, my hands shaking. The air felt thin, cruelly honest. All this time, she had carried my shame alone, but I couldn't stop there. I needed to know everything, needed to destroy what was left before the truth destroyed me. I confronted Tashi that night. "Is there something you're not telling me?" I asked. She laughed, too quickly. "Henry, you're tired. You're being paranoid." But her eyes, they flinched, just once. Enough. I waited until she left for work the next morning, then drove to a private lab. I brought Evan's baby toothbrush, one of my own hairs. The technician didn't ask questions. I didn't offer any answers. 3 days later, the results came in. I opened the envelope in my car. Parked outside the house. Probability of paternity, 0.00%. The words looked unreal, like ink bleeding through a nightmare. My hands went numb. I laughed once, bitterly, as if the sound could hold me together. but it couldn't. Inside, through the window, I saw Tashi holding Evan, my son, or so I had believed, and for a split second, I envied them both. Because they still had a truth to share, while I had none left. Everything I was, husband, father, man, dissolved in that single moment of clarity. I wasn't betrayed by one woman. I was undone by two, one who lied to protect me and one who lied to love me. And somehow, both felt equally cruel. I stood outside the old house, the one with the narrow porch and the pale blue shutters she loved so much. The air smelled the same, damp cedar, soft rain, the faint echo of her laughter in the wind. Through the window, I could still picture her there, knitting in the late afternoon light, a quiet rhythm that once felt eternal. I whispered, though there was no one to hear me. She knew everything, from the start, and still, she chose silence. She carried my weakness so I could keep my pride. I let out a broken laugh. And I repaid her with betrayal, with arrogance. I thought I was escaping a failed marriage, when all I did was walk away from the only person who ever truly loved me. The wind moved gently through the curtains, like her hand once did across my back when I couldn't sleep. I cheated. I lied. And in return, I was given a child who isn't mine. Fair, isn't it? I said softly. Maybe that's what justice looks like, the universe handing us the truth we refuse to see, wrapped in pain sharp enough to make us remember. Inside, the rooms were empty now, just dust, silence, and the faint scent of the past. I placed our wedding photo on the table, the one where we both looked impossibly young, like we believed love could outlast everything. Then, I unfolded the DNA report one last time. The paper trembled in my hands, not from anger, but from the weight of understanding. I slipped it back into the same white envelope Ziyan once gave me, took a pen and wrote across the front, "To Ziyan, the only truth I ever had." For a long moment, I just stood there, and for the first time in years I didn't feel angry, just grateful and unbearably human.